A 16-year-old bastard takes a Valyrian steel sword to a lord's neck in his own chambers and does not blink. The walls of Winterfell shake under the tread of 14-foot giants. A king in the north goes into a cell beneath his own castle, dragged there by his own brother. And on the last night of the old world, a horn 8,000 years old goes to a man's lips at the foot of a wall that was never, ever meant to fall, and he blows it anyway. This is not the story you remember. The night is dark and full of theories. What if Jon Snow got tired of asking the realm for help and simply took everything it had, and in doing so, made the single worst mistake in the history of the living? Let's explore the absolute frozen depths of this dark, aggressive, and completely rewritten history of Westeros in our video today. The ice is already screaming. In the history we all know, the Night's Watch is a shield that guards the realms of men, a brotherhood of thieves, bastards, and broken lords who swear away crowns, lands, and children for the privilege of freezing to death on somebody else's behalf. Jon Snow held that oath. He held it while the South laughed at him. He held it while his brother died at a wedding, and he held it right up until his own officers put their knives in him for the crime of letting the free folk through the gate. But shields break, and what is left in a man's hand when a shield breaks is usually a blade. This is the story of the Black King of Winter, a man who tears down 8,000 years of law in a single season, puts his own brother in chains to save a world that hates him for it, and ends by making the most catastrophic decision anybody in Westerosi history has ever made, for the very best reasons anyone has ever had. Before we witness the fall of Winterfell and the night the wall itself comes down, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. If this video reaches 8,000 likes, we will immediately begin writing the sequel, The War of the Two Wolves. Also, join our Discord server, linked in the description below, to debate Westerosi lore with fellow fans. Now, adjust your armor, draw your swords, and let us travel to the top of the wall, where the wind smells of hunger, and there are 19 days of food left. Act 1. The Starving Shield. The wind howls like a dying beast down the length of the wall. Jon Snow stands on the wall walk 700 feet above his own castle, in a cloak that has been patched 4 times, his face thinned by 6 weeks of half rations, watching the brothers in the frozen yard below move like men already 3/4 dead. Beside his boot lies the last raven from King's Landing, crumpled where he dropped it. It is a refusal. No men, no grain. Only a reminder, written in the elegant hand of a maester who has never been cold in his life, that the Night's Watch takes no part in the wars of the realm. 6 weeks ago, this boy was not a commander of anything. Here is how fast the world moved. It is the 299th year after Aegon's conquest. Robb Stark is in the Riverlands with 20,000 Northmen and a crown of bronze and iron on his head, winning every battle he fights and losing the war a little more with each one. Joffrey Baratheon sits the Iron Throne. Tywin Lannister sits behind it. And beyond the wall, a full year earlier than it should have, the great ranging of Lord Commander Jeor Mormont has just come apart in blood and mutiny at Craster's Keep, and the old bear has come home on a hurdle. The Watch buries Mormont in the ice cells because the ground is too hard to dig. Jon Snow is not there to carry him. He is 400 miles west of that funeral, coming down out of the Frostfangs on a stolen Garen with an arrow wound in his leg, because he spent the last months of that ranging attached to Corn Halfhand's scouting party, was taken alive in the pass, and lived among the free folk for a season, under orders to turn his cloak and mean it, long enough to walk beside Mance Rayder's host, to kill a skin changer named Orell with his own hand, and to get out again carrying a clear-eyed count of exactly how many of them there are and exactly what is walking behind them. He rides through the gate of Castle Black 6 days after the old bear goes into the ice, and he is the first man in that castle in a year who can tell the rest of them what is actually happening in the world. 3 days later, they hold a choosing. And Jon Snow, who is 16 years old, who has been a steward for less than 2 years and a deserter for 1 night of it, becomes the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, in a hall where every man voting knows the truth. There is no food, there is no help coming, and the thing that killed the old bear is still out there and getting closer. Jon Snow says to Samwell Tarly, his voice as flat as the frost, "The boy on that throne would like us to die quietly, Sam, so that our dying does not disturb his feast. He calls us the shield that guards the realms of men. But a shield nobody feeds is not a shield. It is just a heavy thing a dead man is still holding." Samwell Tarly says to Jon Snow, his hands shaking as he grips a ledger of stores that has almost nothing left written in it. "We have salt beef for 19 days, Jon. 19. Then it is boiled leather and whatever the horses are still carrying on them. And the free folk are coming. All of them. Not a raiding party. Everyone. Mance Rayder has gathered near 100,000 souls under one banner, and he is walking them at our gate, because whatever is behind them is worse than we are." Jon looks north, past the wall, into the haunted forest, where the mist has been standing in the same place for 11 days without moving in the wind. Jon Snow says to himself, "If the kings will not be a shield for us, then we will have to become the reckoning for them." He turns and walks down to the Lord Commander's chambers, where two men are arguing over the disposition of the last barrel of salt beef, as though the argument were about honor. Sir Alliser Thorne, Master-at-Arms, who has hated Jon since the day he arrived, and Janos Slynt, briefly and disastrously Lord of Harrenhal, formerly commander of the City Watch of King's Landing, sent to the Wall in disgrace, and behaving, from the hour he arrived, exactly as though the Wall were lucky to have him. Janos Slynt says to Jon Snow with a sneer he has been practicing since the choosing, "Ah, the bastard boy playing at command. Here is your order for the day, Snow, since you seem to lack the wit to give one yourself. Hang the wildling prisoners in the ice cells. 6 fewer mouths. That is what a commander does. Arithmetic." Jon Snow says to Janos Slynt, with a detached precision that is far more frightening than anger, "You have been at this wall for 2 moons, Lord Janos. In that time you have not stood a watch, not swung an axe at the woodpile, not ranged a single mile beyond that gate, and not once eaten less than a full ration while men who have been here 20 years chewed leather. You speak of mouths to feed. You are the only mouth in this castle that has fed on nothing else." He does not raise his voice, and he does not warn him. Longclaw comes out of the scabbard in one motion, and the smoke-dark Valyrian steel takes Janos Slynt's head off between one word and the next, and the head strikes the table and rolls, obscenely, into the empty meat barrel the two of them were arguing over. Then, nothing. No shouting, no scrape of steel, no sound at all from the yard outside. Just a room with 3 men in it, and one of them on the floor, and a boy of 16 standing over him, holding a sword that is still perfectly steady. Sir Alliser Thorne has his own sword half drawn before the body has finished falling. Sir Alliser Thorne says to Jon Snow, "That was murder. There was no trial, no charge read, no sentence passed. You have broken the law of the Watch inside the walls of the Watch." Jon Snow says to Sir Alliser Thorne, the point of Longclaw level with the man's breastbone, "The vows are dead, Alliser. The cold killed them. Every man who ever swore that oath swore it in exchange for something. Food, walls, men, a realm at our backs. And the realm stopped paying 2 winters ago, and has not sent so much as a raven since. So you have precisely 2 choices left in this world, and I am going to let you pick one. Serve a living commander, or lie down beside a dead lord." Behind him, men have come to the doorway. Gren, Pip, Ed Tollett, half a dozen more, and not one of them has drawn on Jon, and every one of them has drawn on Thorne. And Alliser Thorne, who is many things but has never once in his life been stupid, looks at that doorway and understands that the oath he has been holding over this boy's head for 2 years has just quietly stopped existing. Slowly, he lowers his blade. Act 2. The Pact of Bone and Iron. The gate at Castle Black opens 3 days later, and it does not open for a raid. It opens for a parley. Mance Rayder rides out of the tree line, alone, on a shaggy Garin, in a faded black cloak mended with red silk. The cloak of a brother of the Night's Watch, which he has worn deliberately for 20 years to remind every crow who looks at him exactly where he came from. He looks at the black-clad ranks drawn up in disciplined lines. He looks at the head of Janos Slint on a spike above the gate, already frozen. Mance Rayder says to Jon Snow, "You have grown some teeth since we last spoke, Crow. Or is it your grace now? I have heard 3 different titles for you in as many days, and I am told at least one of them was your own idea." Jon Snow says to Mance Rayder, "Call me whatever gets your people through that gate fastest. Here is the truth, Mance, and I will not dress it. This wall will not save you. It will not save me either. It has stopped one enemy for 8,000 years, and the one that is coming now is the one it was actually built for, and I do not believe it is going to be enough." Mance Rayder says to Jon Snow, "Then what are you offering me? Because I have 90-odd thousand people back there in the snow, and perhaps 30,000 of them can hold a spear, and the rest are old women and boys and girls with frostbite in their toes. I did not spend 20 years pulling 60 warring clans into one host so that a boy in a black cloak could tell me my wall is broken." Jon Snow says to Mance Rayder, "I am offering you the North, not as raiders, as people who live there. The gift is empty, and it has been empty for 200 years, and south of that there are fields nobody is farming, and holdfasts nobody is holding, because every man who could carry a spear went south with my brother. Your 30,000 fight under my command. Your wargs scout for me. Your giants break what needs breaking. In exchange, your children eat, and sleep behind stone, and grow up. And when the dead come south, and they are coming south, we meet them with 100,000 living, instead of 2 threadbare armies dying in separate places for separate reasons." Mance Rayder says to Jon Snow with a low, raspy laugh, "The free folk do not kneel, Jon Snow." That is not a slogan. It is the entire reason there are free folk. 8,000 years we have run from men with crowns. Jon Snow says to Mance Rayder, "Then keep running. Run south, with the wall at your back and the dead at your heels, and every northern lord's arrow in your front, and see how far 100,000 starving people get before winter finishes the job the others started. Or, stand with me. Take the castles from the lords who left us both to die, and build something where free means more than the right to freeze in a ditch without a lord's permission. I do not want your knees, Mance. I have no use for knees. I want your axes." Mance Rayder turns in the saddle and looks back at the tree line, at the giants standing among the pines like walking towers, at the spearwives, at the mammoths, at the endless dark smear of human beings stretching back into the forest. Then he turns around and puts out his hand. Mance Rayder says to Jon Snow, "The Black King and the King beyond the wall, gods help the South. They will not know what has hit them until the snow turns red." Understand exactly what has just happened at that gate, because in northern terms it is not a treaty. It is the oldest crime there is. For 8,000 years, the entire purpose of every man in a black cloak was to keep those people on the other side of that ice, and every northern lord from the Neck to the Bay of Seals grew up on stories of what the free folk do to a holdfast when they get past it. Eddard Stark took heads with his own hands for less than opening a postern. Jon Snow has just done the one thing his own father would have taken his head for, without a moment's hesitation and without a single hard feeling about it. He has opened the gate and let the enemy through. He knows it. He does it anyway, and he does it in daylight, in front of 300 witnesses, because he has worked out something that nobody south of the wall has yet. The free folk are not the enemy. They are the last 100,000 living human beings north of that ice, and every one of them the wall keeps out is one more corpse in the army coming to kill everybody else. And there is one more thing which Mance does not mention at that gate, and which will matter more than everything else in this story put together. For 20 years, alongside everything else he was doing, Mance Rayder has been digging. Hundreds of graves, barrows, and ruins, from the Frostfangs to the Antler, opened one after another by a man who told his own people he was searching for weapons, and told nobody at all what he was really looking for. And in one of them, a giant's grave, under a cairn nobody had touched in an age, he found it. 3 feet of black horn banded in old gold, and the runes cut along its length are the runes of the first men. It is the horn of Joramin, the horn of winter, and every story the free folk have ever told about it agrees on one thing. Blow it, and the wall comes down. Mance has never dared sound it. He has been carrying it for a year, waiting for a moment when there is no other card left in his hand, and quietly hoping that moment never arrives. Act 3. The Descent of the Black Storm. The host that comes down the King's Road that autumn does not look like an army, it looks like weather. At the head of the column ride the Black Brothers, 300 of them, in polished mail, because Jon Snow has understood something about the South that Mance never had to learn. The men in those castles will open their gates to a black cloak far faster than they will to a fur one. Behind the crows come the free folk in a river 4 miles long, spear wives with painted faces, thens in bronze scale, hunters, wargs, mammoths, and the giants, 12 and 14 feet of them, walking with their long, slow strides and carrying uprooted pines the way another man carries a walking stick. The first castle in their road is the Last Hearth, and the Last Hearth is nearly empty, because the Great Jon and every fighting Umber of age went south with Robb Stark a year ago and has not come back. What is left holding it is the Great Jon's uncle, a huge, filthy, one-eyed old brute named Mors Umber, who men call crow food because a crow once took his eye while he lay drunk and he bit its head off in answer. Mors Umber says to Jon Snow, roaring down from the battlements, 200 years my house has fed your watch, crow. 200 years of corn and salt beef and boys, and you come to my gate with wildlings at your back? I know what those things do to a holdfast. I have buried what they leave. Turn that host around, or I will make a wall out of your heads. Jon Snow says to Mors Umber, without dismounting, Your nephew took every man from here who could hold a spear, my lord, and marched them 1,000 miles south to fight over a chair. You have 40 men on that wall, and half of them have gray in their beards. I have 30,000, and I have giants. I am not going to insult you by pretending this is a negotiation. I do not negotiate any more, my lord. I count lives. 40 of yours against 100,000 of mine is not a hard sum, and it does not take me long to do it. Open the gate, feed my people, and swear to me, and you keep your castle, your name, and every soul inside those walls. Refuse, and I take all 4 anyway. Mors Umber says to Jon Snow, And if I open it, and your savages start cutting throats in my own hall? Jon Snow says to Mors Umber, Then you will have my word that the man who cuts the first one dies before the body is cold, and you will find out very quickly what my word is worth. That is all I have to offer you, my lord. It is more than the South has offered me in a year of asking. Crowfood spits over the battlement and considers and does not open the gate. So Jon shows him. One giant walks forward, a great shaggy thing in bone plate and furs, roaring, dragging a stone-headed club the size of a rowboat, and hits the ironwood gate of the Last Hearth once. The gate does not hold. Umber archers put 4 arrows into the giant as it comes on, and here is the part the songs always leave out. The arrows go in. Giants are not proof against steel. They are simply very hard to kill quickly, and this one keeps walking with 4 shafts standing out of its shoulder and hits the gate twice more before it drops. And by the time it drops, the gate is kindling and there are thens in the yard. Within the hour, the Last Hearth belongs to Jon Snow. He loses the giant and 9 free folk. The Umbers lose 11 men, and Jon Snow keeps the promise he made from the saddle. When a Thenn cuts down an unarmed Umber steward in the Great Hall, Jon has him hanged from the gatehouse before the evening meal, in front of everyone, wildling and Northmen together, and leaves him hanging for 3 days. Jon Snow says to the assembled Umber garrison, standing on the steps of a hall that is no longer theirs, "You are not sworn to House Umber any more. Not because I have taken your oaths from you, but because the man you swore them to is 1,000 miles away, fighting a war that will not matter at all in 2 years. You are sworn now to the survival of the living. Every man who marches with me eats. Every man who deserts will be found by wargs, and I will not be there to say what happens after that." Act 4. The Siege of Winterfell. Winterfell rises out of the plain exactly the way it has for 8,000 years, gray and enormous and patient. The direwolf still flies from the towers, but there are fewer than 500 men behind those walls, because the war took the rest. Robb Stark has been back at Winterfell for 9 days, and he did not bring an army with him. He came north hard and fast with 300 riders, leaving his host camped in the Riverlands under the Great JON, because Balon Greyjoy has crowned himself on Pike, and long ships have started burning villages along the stony shore, and there was nobody left in the north with the authority to answer it. He has spent those 9 days doing sums that will not come out, and thinking, for the first time in a year, about a war he is beginning to understand he cannot win by winning battles. He is standing on the balcony of the Great Keep at first light when his steward comes up the stairs at a dead run. By the time Robb reaches the north-facing wall, he can see it himself, a black line lying across the snow from horizon to horizon, far too wide to be any army he has ever heard of, and moving. Robb Stark says to Maester Luwin, quietly, "Those are black cloaks in the van. That is the Watch. Why is the Watch marching on my house with a banner I have never seen, a white wolf on black?" Maester Luwin says to Robb Stark, "My lord, there are giants in that column." Robb goes down to the gate himself, and he goes without his sword drawn, because the man riding out of that host toward him is riding a Garren, with a white direwolf pacing alongside it. And even at 300 yards, and even after a year, Robb Stark would know his brother anywhere. Robb Stark says to Jon Snow, "Jon, whatever this is, stop it now, while it can still be stopped. You are a brother of the Night's Watch. You are the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. You swore to take no part." Jon Snow says to Robb Stark, and his voice is not unkind, which is somehow the worst thing about it. "The realm swore things too, Robb. Every lord in Westeros swore to feed us and man us and stand behind us. And when I sent ravens to 5 different kings this winter, do you know how many answered? 1. A boy of 13 in King's Landing, telling me to mind my own business. My brothers have been eating boiled leather since the turn of the year. 200 of them are dead. And while I was burying them, you were 3 battles deep into a war about who gets to sit in a chair." Robb Stark says to Jon Snow, "Then ask me. Ask me, Jon, and I will empty every granary in Winterfell into your wagons tonight, and you can be north again inside a fortnight. You did not have to bring wildlings to my gate." Jon Snow says to Robb Stark, "I did not come for a granary. Winterfell is the only fortress north of the Neck that can hold 30,000 people through a winter and stand a siege by something that does not eat, does not sleep, and does not stop. I am not asking you for supplies, Robb. I am taking the castle." Robb Stark says to Jon Snow, drawing his sword at last, "Then you will take it off me." The fight for Winterfell lasts less than 3 hours, and it is not really a fight. Jon does not need to break the walls. Mance's skin changers do the work. An eagle that belonged to a dead raider named Orell goes over the battlements at dawn and takes an archer's eye out on the north tower, and a warg named Varamir sends a shadowcat through the drainage grate below the glass gardens. And while 500 defenders are looking at those 2 things, 400 free folk are already over the east wall on ropes. The giants come to the main gate almost as an afterthought, and the gate lasts about as long as the one at Last Hearth. Jon and Robb meet in the middle courtyard, in the snow, 20 feet from the Heart Tree. It is not a duel out of a song. Robb fights the way he was taught by Sir Roderick Cassel, cleanly, correctly, beautifully. Jon fights the way a man fights after he has thrown a burning curtain over a corpse that was still trying to get its hands around his Lord Commander's throat. He fights ugly and low and without one single wasted motion, and after 4 exchanges, he takes Robb's sword out of his hand with a strike that breaks 2 bones in his brother's wrist, and puts him on his back in the snow with Longclaw's point at the hollow of his throat. Neither of them says anything for a long moment. Ghost stands over Robb's shoulder, white as the ground, and does not touch him. Jon Snow says to his guards, without lowering the sword, "Take the king in the north to the cells beneath the first keep. He is my brother. He will have a brazier, a bed, hot food, and Maester Luwin twice a day for that wrist. He will be treated with every courtesy this castle can manage. And if he attempts to leave that cell, you will break both his legs and sin for me, and I will not hold it against any of you." Robb Stark says to Jon Snow from the ground, "Father would not know you. You have become the thing we defend the North from. Not the Lannisters, Jon. Not the South. You are the reason that wall is there at all." Jon Snow says to Robb Stark, "No. I have become what the North actually was, before 8,000 years of quiet let us start telling ourselves we were the good ones. The Starks did not hold this country by being kind. They held it by being a sword made of ice and putting it wherever the winter required. And you are right that Father would not know me. But Father died 200 miles south of here with his hands tied behind his back, because he was the last man in this family who still believed there was a third way. There are 2 more people in that castle, and Jon has been putting off thinking about them since the last hearth. He finds them in the Great Hall an hour later. Rickon Stark is 4 years old and has spent the morning listening to giants knock his front gate down, and he comes across that floor at a dead run and hits Jon somewhere around the waist, hard enough to stagger him, and holds on and will not be talked to. Shaggy Dog stands off by the dais, with his black hackles up and his teeth showing, and Ghost simply looks at him until he sits. And in a chair by the fire, because he cannot walk to it, is Bran. Bran Stark says to Jon Snow, "They said you were coming. I mean the crows said it. Not our crows. The ones in the dream, the ones with a third eye. I saw you on the ice, with a horn in your hands, and everything below you was falling, and there was no bottom to it. I have seen it 4 times now, Jon. It is always the same, and it always ends the same way." Jon Snow crouches down beside the chair, with his brother's little brother still attached to his hip, and for the first time since the night he took Janos Slynt's head off, something in his face is not entirely made of iron. Jon Snow says to Bran Stark, "Then tell me how it ends, Bran, because I am running out of people who will tell me anything at all." Bran Stark says to Jon Snow, "I do not think it does end." I think that is the part everyone gets wrong. Jon has no answer for that either. He gives Bran and Rickon the run of the castle, the same chambers they have always had, and the same guards, northern men, not free folk, chosen for it by name. He does not make them kneel. He does not make anyone kneel. And that night, when the Maester's fire has burned down and the hall is empty, Jon Snow sits alone in his father's chair for a long while and thinks about a boy in a chair by the fire, telling him he has already seen how this goes. Act 5. The Black Regency. Jon Snow sits in his father's chair in the great hall of Winterfell, and he does not wear a crown of gold. He wears a plain circlet of black iron, hammered out of a broken hinge by the castle smith, which is exactly the kind of gesture that men remember for 200 years. Standing along the wall at his right hand, invited by no one and objected to by nobody, is Roose Bolton, who came north from Robb's army 3 weeks ago on some errand about levies that nobody has since been able to explain, and who has now watched an entire kingdom change hands from a distance of 40 feet without once changing his expression. His pale eyes rest on the black iron circlet with a quiet, patient approval that ought to frighten everybody in that hall a great deal more than it does. Jon Snow says to the assembled northern lords and what is left of their households, "The Game of Thrones is finished in the north. As of this morning, there is one law here, and it is the law of the wall. Every bushel of grain, every bar of iron, every horse, every forge, and every man and woman able to work belongs to the defense of the realm until the dead are beaten or we are. Hoarding is treason. Raising a banner against this seat is treason, and treason against the living is punished in exactly one way." Lord Rickard Karstark says to Jon Snow, on his feet before Jon has finished, "You are a bastard and a usurper, Snow. You've put your own true-born brother in a hole in the ground. You have handed the gift and the Umberlands to savages who have been murdering our people since before there was a wall. You are not a king. You are a wildling with a stark face." Jon Snow says to Lord Rickard Karstark, "I am not a king either. Kings are what the South has. I am a surgeon, my lord, and I am cutting the rot out of this body, while there is still a body to cut it out of. You lost 2 sons in the Riverlands over a chair. I am asking you to keep the rest of your children out of the ground entirely. If you would rather die honorably in the old way, the road south is open, and I will not stop a single man who takes it. But if you want your grandchildren to see a spring, then sit down, shut your mouth, and start sharpening axes." Karstark sits down. He does not stop hating Jon, and Jon does not expect him to, and in the long run, that will matter. There is also the matter of 20,000 Northmen sitting in the Riverlands 1,000 miles away, who went south a year ago behind a king who is now in a cell under his own castle. Jon does not send them a demand. He sends them a single raven with 14 words on it, addressed to no lord in particular. "Your homes are held, your families are fed, come north before the roads close." It is the cleverest thing he does all winter. Some of them come. Roughly 9,000 ride north over the following 2 moons, Glovers, Kerwins, Hornwoods, mostly the ones with children, and they arrive to find their villages standing, their granaries under guard, and wildlings sleeping in the next barn. The rest stay south under the Great Jon and Rickard Karstark's remaining son, and hold the Riverlands for a king who cannot answer them, which is a thing that will have consequences none of these people can currently imagine. What follows is the strangest and most efficient winter the North has ever had. Jon Snow institutes a levy the small folk immediately name the winter tax, and it takes everything. He puts the free folk into the gift and the emptied Umberlands, but he splits the clans deliberately and settles them among northern villages instead of apart from them, because he understands that 2 peoples who share a granary through a hard winter will not be 2 peoples by spring. He sends work gangs to recut the ditch at Moat Cailin and rebuilds 3 of the abandoned castles along the wall, and turns Winterfell's forges into a single continuous fire that does not go out for 4 months. And exactly 1 man in the whole of the South answers him. Samwell Tarly writes to 5 kings on Jon's behalf that winter, and 4 of those letters go into 4 fires. The 5th reaches Dragonstone, where a hard, joyless, deeply unpopular man reads a description of what came over the Fist of the First Men, believes every word of it, and orders his people to start cutting dragonglass out of the cliffs under his own castle. Stannis Baratheon sends Jon Snow no soldiers because he has perhaps 4,000 left and needs every one of them. He sends no grain because Dragonstone grows nothing. What he sends is 11 shiploads of raw obsidian up the eastern coast to Eastwatch by the Sea in exchange for northern iron, with a letter of 4 lines that does not once mention crowns, oaths, or the fact that the man receiving it has just taken a kingdom by force. Every spearhead in the north gets a black glass edge that winter, and Jon Snow keeps that 4-line letter in a drawer for the rest of his life. Late in the 3rd moon, Samwell Tarly finds Jon on the wall walk at an hour when nobody sensible is awake. Samwell Tarly says to Jon Snow, "You hanged 2 men this morning. Grain hoarders. One of them was 60 and had 4 grandchildren. And I read the ledger myself, Jon. He had 11 bushels. 11! That is not a conspiracy. That is a frightened old man." Jon Snow says to Samwell Tarly, "I know exactly how many bushels he had. Samwell Tarly says to Jon Snow, "Then why?" Jon Snow says to Samwell Tarly, still looking north, "Because 30,000 people watched me say hoarding was treason, and if the first man I catch doing it is a frightened old grandfather and I let him go, then the next 400 men who hoard will all be frightened old grandfathers, and by spring there will be nothing in the granaries and everyone will starve equally and honorably. Sam, I am not telling you it was right. I am telling you I could not find a way around it, and I have stopped being able to tell the difference between those two things, and that frightens me considerably more than the dead do." Samwell Tarly says to Jon Snow, after a long silence, "Ned Stark would have found the third choice." Jon Snow says to Samwell Tarly, "Ned Stark went south to find the third choice, Sam. They put his head on a spike for it. And in a warm cell under the first keep, with a brazier and a splinted wrist, Robb Stark watches his brother through the bars on a midnight visit. Robb Stark says to Jon Snow, 'You have become exactly the thing you say you are fighting. Look at yourself. You are cold all the way through. You have men hanged in the yard before breakfast, and you do not think about them again by supper. You are not a Stark anymore.' Jon Snow says to Robb Stark, 'I am precisely what the Starks were, Robb. Before 8,000 years of peace, let us start believing we were the honorable ones. They did not build that wall by being fair. They built it by doing whatever the winter required. I am the king of winter. Winter does not care whether you think it is fair.' Robb Stark says to Jon Snow, very quietly, 'And when the dead are beaten? What happens to the man who did all this, when the world he saved wants its castles back?' Jon looks at him through the bars for a long moment and does not have an answer, and both of them notice. And while Jon Snow is reforging the North into a single enormous weapon, 1,000 miles south, a report about him is being carried up a staircase to the most dangerous man in Westeros, who is about to read it, work out exactly what he is looking at, and make a decision about the North that will matter more than every battle in this entire story. We will get to that in about a minute. Act 6, The Southern Silence. In King's Landing, on a gray autumn morning with the first real cold coming up off the Blackwater, Tywin Lannister reads a report that has taken 31 days to reach him, and sets it down on the council table with great care. Tywin Lannister says to Sir Kevan Lannister, "The Stark bastard has taken the North. Not raided it, taken it. He holds Winterfell, the Last Hearth, Moat Cailin, and 3 castles on the Wall. He has the northern granaries, the northern forges, and something between 80 and 100,000 wildlings settled on land that used to be ours to tax. And he has the king in the north in a cell, which means that, as of this moment, Robb Stark's army in the Riverlands is a body walking around without a head, and does not yet know it." Cersei Lannister says to Tywin Lannister with a short, dismissive laugh, "Then let them all freeze up there together, savages and traitors in a snowbank. The wildlings will be eating each other by spring, father, and it will not cost us 1 soldier. We have the reach, we have the Tyrells, we have the throne." Tywin Lannister says to Cersei Lannister, and there is no patience in it at all, "You are being a fool, which I have come to expect. But you are being a loud fool in front of the council, which I will not have. Understand what has happened. Every enemy this family has ever faced wanted the same thing we want: the chair, the crown, the taxes. You can negotiate with a man who wants your chair. Jon Snow does not want the chair. He believes the world is ending, and men who believe the world is ending will do arithmetic that no sane lord would ever consider. If that boy decides one morning that the South is a distraction he cannot afford, he will come down that road with giants, and there is not a wall between here and the neck that will hold him for a week." Sir Kevan Lannister says to Tywin Lannister, "Then what do we do, brother? March north in winter?" Tywin Lannister says to Sir Kevan Lannister, "No. We are not going to fight him. We are going to let the winter in the wildlings do it. And in the meantime, we will write to the Iron Bank of Bravos and quietly purchase every free company in Essos that will take our coin. Because I would rather pay for 20,000 sellswords I do not need than discover in the spring that I needed them in the autumn. In that, apart from 11 shiploads of black glass from a king nobody in King's Landing takes seriously anymore, is the whole of the South's response. The Tyrells consolidate the Reach and count their harvest. The Iron Throne writes nothing at all. Not one wagon of grain, not one company of men, and not one word of acknowledgement crosses the neck going north for the entire length of that winter. The Black King is left entirely alone in the deepening dark, which is, after all, exactly what he told them would happen. Act 7. The Horn of Winter. The 3 blasts come at the 9th hour of a night with no moon. Every man on the wall knows what 3 blasts of the great horn at Castle Black means, because every man on the wall has been taught it since his first day, and not one of them in 8,000 years has ever heard it sounded. 1 blast for a returning ranger, 2 for wildlings, 3 for the others. Jon Snow is on top of the wall inside a quarter hour, and what he sees from 700 feet up in the dark does not look like an army either. It looks like the ground itself has begun to move. The whole northern horizon is a slow blue shimmer, thousands upon thousands of points of cold light, coming on in absolute silence. No drums, no horns, no shouting, no horses. Just the dry, endless, papery sound of 100,000 dead things walking through snow. At the front of it, on a dead horse, rides something that the free folk have 300 names for, and the maesters have none. Samwell Tarly says to Jon Snow, his voice climbing, "The spells! Jon, the wall is supposed to be warded. The wall is supposed to stop them. That is the entire... Why are they not stopping?" Jon Snow says to Samwell Tarly, watching the first whites reach the ice and begin, without hesitation and without any apparent difficulty, to climb. "Because whatever was put into this ice 8,000 years ago has been thinning for a long time, Sam, and nobody has fed it since the last man who knew how to died. We have 30,000 fighters and 300 miles of wall. They do not have to break it, they only have to come over it in one place, and then we are fighting them on our own side of it with our backs to everything we have left." He looks down at the base of the wall, where the muster is. Not the settlements, those are 80 miles south and full of children, but the fighting host he has spent a whole winter building and marching back north for exactly this night. 30,000 spears bivouacked in the snow in the dark, and every one of them tipped with black glass. Then he turns and looks at Mance Rayder, who has been standing 3 feet behind him for the last minute, holding a 3-foot horn banded in old gold, and who has clearly already worked out precisely why he was sent for. Mance Rayder says to Jon Snow, "No." Jon Snow says to Mance Rayder, "Sound it." Mance Rayder says to Jon Snow, "Jon, listen to me. I have carried this thing for a year, and I have never once dared put it to my lips. And do you know why? Because if the songs are wrong, we have nothing. And if the songs are right, then the only thing that has ever stood between the living and that is going to be lying in pieces from one sea to the other. And it will never, ever be put back. Not by you, not by your children, not by anyone. There is no second wall." Jon Snow says to Mance Rayder, "I know exactly what I am asking. They are already climbing it, Mance. In an hour they will be on top of it, and after that, the wall is not a shield anymore. It is a road, and it is theirs. If it comes down now, it comes down on them. Every white in that vanguard, and whatever is riding at the front of them, under 700 feet of ice at once. It buys us the winter. It buys us the north. It is the worst thing anybody in the history of this world will ever have done, and it is the only thing left that I can do." He puts his hand on the horn. Jon Snow says to Mance Rayder, "Get every spear off this ice and 10 miles south of it. Now. Do not form them up. Do not explain it to them. Do not stop to argue with anybody about anything. Run them. Go. What happens 50 minutes later when Jon Snow stands alone on a bare rise a mile south of Castle Black with the horn at his lips is not a sound in any ordinary sense. Men 10 miles south will describe it afterward as a single low note that they did not so much hear as feel behind the sternum. And it goes on, and it goes on, and the snow lifts off the ground for a mile in every direction and hangs there. And then the wall begins to come apart. It does not shatter like glass. It groans. 700 feet of ice that has stood since before there were kings in Westeros makes a sound that nobody living has ever heard anything make. A long, low, grinding complaint that comes up through the soles of every boot for 20 miles. And then it simply loses its will to go on existing, and folds, and comes down in slabs the size of castles. Millions upon millions of tons of it drop straight onto the front of a dead army that does not have the sense to run, and could not have outrun it anyway. The cold blast of displaced air knocks men flat 10 miles away. The sound arrives afterward, and it arrives for a long time. And then there is silence. It is the worst silence in the history of the world. 30,000 fighting men and women standing in the dark 10 miles south of a thing that is no longer there, not one of them making a sound, listening to a horizon that has stopped moving. No wind, no cracking, no whites, nothing at all for a very long time, while 30,000 people slowly work out that they might actually still be alive. When the snow finally stops falling, an hour before dawn, there is a ridge of shattered ice lying across the top of the world from the Bay of Seals to the Bay of Ice, 300 miles of it, and under the northern face of that ridge is the entire vanguard of the dead. Jon Snow stands on a rise south of the Gift, gray with ice dust, watching the sun come up on a horizon that has no wall on it for the first time in 8,000 years. Behind him, 30,000 people have started cheering themselves hoarse. In front of him, Mance Rayder is not cheering at all, and neither is Jon, because out in the ice field, somewhere in the middle of all that ruin, there is a small noise, a slab of ice sliding off another slab of ice, and then another, and then a figure walking out of the wreckage. It comes down off the rubble unhurried, on foot now, its horse gone somewhere under the ice with everything else, and the cold rolls ahead of it so hard that the meltwater freezes as it walks. And behind it, one by one, and then in dozens, and then in hundreds, the dead begin to climb up out of the broken ice. Crushed, shattered, dragging limbs that are pointing the wrong way, and getting up anyway, and coming on. Because ice was never what killed them. Ice was only ever what slowed them down. Jon Snow has just spent the single greatest defense the world has ever built, spent all of it in one night on 1 hour of one battle. And in the light of the sunrise, he is watching the thing he spent it against get up out of the wreckage and keep walking. Jon Snow draws Longclaw, and the rising sun catches the Valyrian steel, and he turns to face 30,000 people who have just stopped cheering. Jon Snow says to his army, "The wall is down. There is nothing behind us and nothing in front of us but them and us. Form on me or on your knees, and I am telling you now, they do not take prisoners and they do not take knees." The screen fades to black on the sound of 100,000 dead things climbing out of the ice at once. That is our theory. Jon Snow watched 5 kings ignore him while his brothers ate boiled leather and decided that the only way to save a realm that would not save itself was to take it. By force, from his own family, with an army of the people that realm had spent 8,000 years keeping out. And it worked. The North was fed, armed, unified, and dug in for the first time in its history, and it was ready in a way that the Westeros we know never came close to being. And then, to stop the dead for a single winter, he pulled down the only structure that had ever stopped them at all. Did the Black King buy humanity the time it needed to survive? Or did he simply hand the Night King the last thing standing in his way? Was Jon Snow right to break every oath he ever swore? And if you had been standing on that bridge with the horn in your hands and the ice already crawling with them, are you certain, absolutely certain, that you would have put it down? If you want to see the conclusion of the Black Winter Crusade and find out whether Robb Stark ever gets out of that cell to raise the North against his own brother, make sure to smash that subscribe button and leave a like on this video. If we reach 8,000 likes, we will begin writing Part 2, The War of the Two Wolves. Let us know in the comments, was Jon right to bring down the wall? Until then, remember, the night is dark and winter is already